Guys, I never imagined that combining Ankara and Mikado could create such a stunning luxury Bubu dress until I tried it myself. In today's tutorial, I'll be showing you step by step how to sew this stunning luxury Bubu dress using Ankara and Mikado fabric. It's elegant, comfortable and perfect for special occasions. So stay tuned, and if you haven't already, please like, share and subscribe so you won't miss any of my sewing tutorial. Now let's dive in. For this project, I'll be using 2 yards of Mikado fabric. However, I recommend using 2.5 yards to avoid any joining at the back, which doesn't look very neat. I only used 2 yards because that was all that was left where I bought it. You can use any thick plain fabric of your choice as long as it gives a similar structure. For the Ankara, you will need 2.5 yards. You will also need a trimmings or embellishment of your choice, hemming gum and lining if you're using a fabric that is as thick as Mikado. Now let's get started. To begin, I started by folding my Mikado fabric into 4 equal layers. Now, each layer here is 25 inches. That is a half of my shoulder measurement plus my sleeve length, and I've added an extra 2 inches to give room for hemming the sleeves and for cutting allowance. This measurement runs right from the center back to the point where I want my sleeve to stop. For the length, I'm working with 40 inches. I got this by joining an extra piece at the back to make it longer. Normally, it should be my full dress length, but I decided to make the best of what I had. I folded into 4 because I'll be cutting both the front and the back piece together, and I won't be adding any zipper to this Bubu gown. The next step is to draw a starting line at the upper part of the fabric. From this line, I will take all my vertical measurements, and from the folded edge of the fabric, I will take all my horizontal measurements. Starting from the folded edge, I will mark 3 inches for the neck width. This 3-inch width will be the same for both the front and the back neckline. Next, I will mark the back neck depth at 1.5 inches, and then I will connect it to the 3-inch neck width using a gentle round curve, just like this. Since we'll be adding a collar to this gown, I will now measure from my shoulder down to where I want my collar to stop. For me, that is 17 inches, but feel free to mark any length that suits your style. The collar length is totally up to you. So I will place my tape at the shoulder and measure 17 inches downward. At that 17-inch point, I will go inward by 1.5 inches, and then I will connect it back to the 3-inch neck width mark, forming a clean V shape at the front. After that, I will place my tape on my folded edge, which is my center back, and measure half of my shoulder plus my sleeve length, then add an extra 1.5 inches. That means I'm marking from the center back to my sleeve length with an additional 1.5 inches for hemming the sleeve. For this gown, I marked 24 inches from the center back to the sleeve length. At that 24-inch point, I came down by 1.5 inches to create the shoulder slope, then connected that slanted line back to the 3-inch neck width mark. After doing that, I will mark half of my sleeve opening, which is 10 inches, and I added extra 1 inch for seam allowance. That means I'm marking a total of 11 inches. I connected those points with a straight line. Now I'm going to mark the shoulder to hip line, which for me is 27 inches. This measurement varies from person to person, so make sure to measure your client to get the correct hip line. Once I got my measurement, I ruled a straight line across the fabric at the hip line. On that line, I marked a quarter of my hip circumference, which is 10.5 inches in my case, and added an extra 7 inches for ease and seam allowance. That gave me a total of 17.5 inches. So on my chest line, which is the same level as where my sleeve opening stopped, I also measured 17.5 inches, Then I connected all 3 points together to meet the sleeve opening. At the underarm, I curved it slightly to avoid having a sharp or pointy edge. I also cleaned off any sharp lines around that area to keep everything neat and avoid confusion. Next, on my hemline, I also marked the same 17.5 inches. Now, my fabric couldn't reach the full length I needed. It only gave me about 40 inches from the 2 yards I used. So on that 40 inches, I'm going to mark the same 17.5 inches. But if you're using enough fabric that gets to your full length, make sure to add 1.5 inches for hemming allowance at the bottom. Then whatever you marked on your hip circumference, mark the same at your hem and connect it back to your hip line. I also added half an inch seam allowance on my shoulder. And that's it for the drafting. The next step is to cut, starting from the back neck depth, following the shoulder slope, down to the sleeve opening, and then along the side seam. After cutting, I notched the center of my back neckline for easy alignment later. Then I separated the back piece from the front piece by removing the inner folded layer. I laid out the front piece neatly and cut out its neck depth. Once that was done, I opened up the front piece and measured half an inch downward from the end of the 17-inch front neck depth. And I connected it with a straight line. From there, I drew a slanted line starting from the point where the neck depth stopped at the sides, connecting it to that half-inch mark in the center. Then I carefully cut along the slants. Always fold your fabric into 2 and align the neckline before cutting. This ensures both sides are perfectly even and one side won't end up more slanted than the other. So next, I place the back piece on top of the front piece and stitch them together at the shoulders. After that, I hemmed the sleeve opening, then came back to continue with the collar. For the collar, I first measured my total neckline. I started from one end of the front neck depth, went all the way around the back neckline, and back to the other end of the front neck depth. My total neckline measurement came out to 44 inches. Next, I needed to determine the width of the collar. And to do this, I measured from one slanted line of the front neck depth to the other. Remember the half-inch slant we created earlier? I opened it up fully and measured from one end to the other. That gave me 4 inches for the collar width. To prepare my collar, I added half an inch to the 4-inch width I measured earlier. That gave me 4.5 inches in width. For the length, I cut a strap of Ankara measuring 47 inches long. I made it longer than my 44 inches neckline by adding an extra 3 inches. This helps to prevent shortage and I can always trim off any excess later. To make the collar firmer, I ironed a paper stay onto the wrong side of the Ankara strap. Next, I folded the strap into 2 with the right sides facing each other. From the top edge, I measured 13 inches downward and marked it. This 13 inches is how deep I want my neckline to be. You can also choose 12 inches, 13 or 14 inches, depending on your preferred neck depths. Another way to do this is to place your tape on the center back, right at the backbone, then bring it forward to the exact point where you want the neckline to stop. Whatever number you get, multiply it by 2, then add your extra 3 inches. This will help you avoid shortage. I hope my explanation is clear so far. Once I was done with that, I found the center of my collar from the 13-inch point down to the end of the collar. I ruled a straight line along that center, then took it to my sewing machine. I stitched directly on that center line, making sure to backstitch 2 to 3 times at the starting point and also backstitch at the end to secure the stitches. Now that I'm done stitching along the center line, I like to try the collar on my neckline to make sure the neckline depth is exactly how I want it. It's better to check now than to finish sewing and have to loosen the entire collar later. Before we continue, let me quickly show you how to adjust the neckline if needed. If the neckline is too deep, measure 1 inch upward from the center stitch, then stitch from there to connect back to your original stitches. Remember to backstitch at the beginning to secure it. If the neckline is too small, loosen up about 1 inch from the center stitch, then restitch and backstitch to secure. Once the depth is perfect, I will now flip my collar to the right side and carefully align the two sides together. Each side from the center stitch we have 2 layers, so make sure they are even. I will pin them lightly to hold in place, then press with an iron for a neat finish. Next, I will fold the collar as shown and notch the center. I will bring my bodice and flip it to the wrong side and then notch the center back as well. Now, I will match the center notch of the collar to the center notch of the bodice, just like you can see me doing on the screen. I'll pin from the center back all the way to the waist area, then take it to my sewing machine and stitch. After stitching one side, I will come back and pin the other side, then stitch that down to the end of the collar. Once both sides are stitched, I will flip the garment to the wrong side and stitch the collar together using the 1/2 inch allowance we notched earlier, making sure to seal up any opening for a clean finish. And that's it for the collar. Now we are moving on to the main part of the day's work, the lower part of the dress, which will be made with Ankara. Please pay close attention to this session so you can easily follow each step. I've gone ahead to cut my Ankara and join it with the lining using hemming gum. Now I will show you exactly how I did that. I cut my Ankara to a length of about 35 inches. I will explain later in the video how I arrived at that measurement. For the width, I measured the width of my Mikado fabric and added an extra 1.5 inches to be on the safe side, since I'm making this design for the very first time. I cut this in 2 pieces, one for the front and one for the back, and I also cut the same size in lining. To fuse the Ankara with the lining, I placed my lining on the table first. Then, starting from the top edge, which is where I'll be drafting my design, I placed my hemming gum strips very close to each other, almost overlapping, down to about 8 inches. This will make that top section firmer. From there, I continued placing the hemming gum strips with a small gap between each one, going all the way down to just before the hem. After doing that, the next thing I did was to place my Ankara on top the lining and sprinkle a little water before ironing. I don't have a steam iron available at the moment, so I make sure to iron thoroughly until the hemming gum completely infused. While ironing, try to smooth out all bubbles to avoid a squeezed or wrinkled effect. I repeated the same process for the back piece as well. We are moving on to determining the length of the Ankara. My full dress length is 63 inches and my Mikado section measures only 40 inches. I subtract 40 from 63. I'm left with 23 inches. That's the length I need to complete the gown. However, my Ankara design will overlap the Mikado by 6 inches. This is how deep I want my design to be. You can choose more or less. So I add the 6 inches overlap to the 23 inches, giving 29 inches. Then I add an extra 3 inches, 1.5 inches for hemming, and another 1.5 inches, just to avoid shortage. This gives me a total Ankara length of 32 inches. But if your Mikado or any fabric you are using for the top is already enough to reach your desired full length, you don't need all these calculations. Simply measure from the point where you want the Ankara to start. It can even be below the knee, down to the hem, and then add 1 inch for hemming allowance. I've already drawn my starting line on the Ankara. Then I marked 6 inches from that line for the overlap and ruled a straight line across. From that 6-inch line, I measured 27 inches, the remaining length, and ruled another line across, then cut off the unwanted excess. And just to note, this is for one piece of Ankara, and here the length is folded into 2, not the width. Now feel free to draw any design of your choice for the Ankara section. Personally, I'm not very good at drawing, but I still managed to come up with this design just for you, my lovely family. So starting from the folded part of the Ankara on the 6-inch line, I marked 3 inches first. Then I marked 6 inches across the rest of the width, leaving a little space at the end for the side seam allowance. The reason I marked 3 inches first is because the center is unfolded, so when I open it up, it will still give me that same 6-inch spacing at the center. On the starting line, the top edge, I repeated the same 3 inches first, then 6 inches across the rest. After marking, I connected the point with straight vertical lines. The next thing I did was that on the lower part only, I marked 1 inch after each vertical line. For the curves, on the first 3-inch mark at the center, I used my curve ruler to create a soft curve, almost like a small lowercase n shape. From there, I went to the next line and connected it upward to the top. Then from the top down to the 1-inch mark, creating a kind of slanted curve. I kept repeating this same process, top to bottom, bottom to top, until I reached the last line. To make the curves look more natural, I connected one point to the next on the lower part with a gentle sweeping curve. That completed my design. Now, what I just showed you here is not the exact size I used for my gown. This was just for demonstration, so you can see the process clearly. You can also draft this on your pattern paper before transferring it to your main fabric. For my actual piece, I started with 1.5 inches at the center instead of 3 inches, followed by 3 inches for the rest, and I repeated the same marking at the top. At the lower part, I still marked the 1-inch spacing and made my curves the same way. If you prefer a bigger design, you can use the first pattern with the 3-inch center. You can also slant the sides for a different effect. Feel free to play around with it and make it your own. It's your creation. Then I went ahead and cut it out, just the way you see me pointing on the screen. After cutting the front, I brought the back piece and placed it underneath the front Ankara. I pinned both layers together carefully, then cut along the exact shape of the first piece. Please don't rush this part, just take your time so you get a neat and accurate cut. Once I was done cutting, I used my lighter to gently burn along the edges of the curves one by one. This helps to seal the edges and prevent fraying. I also burned my Mikado all around. You can as well weave your Mikado. Now, to attach it to my Mikado fabric, I'm going to show you two different methods. Method 1. If your plain fabric is long enough to reach the full length of your dress, simply place your Ankara piece right side facing the wrong side of your plain fabric at the hemline. Stitch them together, then flip it to the right side. After that, top stitch neatly along the design we created earlier. For an even cleaner and more professional finish without any wrinkle or squeeze marks, you can also give it to embroiders to help stitch it for you. Method 2. If your plain fabric doesn't reach the hemline like mine, you will need to place your Ankara piece on top of your plain fabric, making sure that the size of the Ankara overlap the plain fabric by at least 1 inch on both sides. I align the Ankara piece very well, then pin the center to the midpoint of my Mikado. After that, I continued arranging the Ankara neatly, pinning it down tightly and making sure to remove any small bubbles, both on the Ankara and on the plain fabric, before moving over to my sewing machine to top stitch. If you are enjoying this process so far, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect time. There are so many more beautiful designs coming your way. I will repeat the same process for the front piece as well. If you want, you can also give this step to embroiders so they can stitch it even more neatly. That was actually my plan, but since I couldn't find any embroider around my rural area, I decided to improvise and do it myself. So this is what it looks like after top stitching very neatly. So next, I'm going to cover my stitches with my trimmings. To do this, simply top stitch the trim directly on your Ankara, making sure it covers both your stitch line and the raw edges of the Ankara so they won't poke out. You can use any embellishment of your choice here. I initially wanted to use bias, but my sewing machine couldn't sew on it. Instead, I got this trim you can see now on the screen and top stitch it on both the front and back. I also top stitched my trim around the collar area to make it even more beautiful and give it a beautiful finished look. On the waistline, I attached my inner belt, which I have many tutorials where I showed exactly how to do this. I will be leaving the link in my description box. After that, I stitched the sides together and measured the length to confirm it was correct. Finally, I hemmed the bottom and our luxury Bubu dress is beautifully ready. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to So Pretty by Gift. See you in my next one. Happy sewing. Bye bye.